do I think that means? I think that means that Israel, like the United Kingdom, will do whatever necessary to defend our citizens, to defend our people from this kind of wanton savagery, barbarism, and pure evil that we have seen in the last few days. Just yesterday, we uncovered the bodies of 40 babies, a number of whom were decapitated. Women have been raped, pillared, thrown in the back of pickup trucks. Entire families burnt and massacred. If this was your family, if these were your children, what would you do?
And, of course, the situation in Gaza is we are about to speak to a surgeon who's been operating on children in Gaza who've lost parts of their faces because of the aerial bombardment. And he is saying the majority of the cases being dealt with in that hospital are children.
My heart absolutely bleeds for both the people of Gaza and Israel. But the fact of the matter is, it is Hamas. It is Hamas that is using their own people as pawns, as human shields in their Islamist jihadist attack on Israel. It is Hamas that is committing a double war crime by using their people to target our people. And if anyone is to blame, unfortunately, it is them. That is the reality.
Arsen, is there a risk, though, that if the military goes in, we know that they're now massing at the border, if they go in and thousands of children are killed, sympathy for Israel will not be as great as it is now?
We have just uncovered the bodies of 40 babies. Many of them were decapitated. What would you do? What do you think? What would you expect the UK government to do if these were your children? Hamas is like ISIS. In many ways, they're even worse. Israel does not want to fight, but this is a war that was launched upon Israel by Hamas when they infiltrated our communities, our borders, when they went door to door, massacring people, taking them hostage. Over 100 people have been taken hostage, by the way, including a number of British citizens have already been confirmed, murdered as well. The primary duty of any nation is to defend and protect its citizens. The big difference here is whereas Hamas murders, targets, massacres children, women and the elderly, Israel aims only at the Hamas targets. That is
that is the problem
difference.
As we see. We're just seeing the latest pictures of huge plumes of smoke rising into the air. It is civilians who are being affected by this within Gaza, some 2 million of them. And clearly that may well be what Hamas intended by launching this strike, to draw Israel into international condemnation.
Let me ask you, do you have children?
That's beside the point, Mr. Ostrovsky. I'm asking you specifically
I'm sorry.
in Gaza.
I'm sorry. It is not besides the point. When our children are being massacred, are being decapitated, we will act.
I will give you an answer. If something happens to my children, I will not go and carry out a physical violation of another child to actually retaliate for that, if that's the answer you want.
No, that's not the answer I want. And the big difference is that we are not aiming at children, because Israel and the IDF forces are aiming purely and solely at military targets of Hamas. It is Hamas that embeds themselves in civilian areas. It is Hamas that puts their weapons in schools and mosques and hospitals. It is Hamas that uses children as human shields.
With scores of children arriving at the doors. We're about to speak to a surgeon who's had to operate on a child who's lost half their face today.
Because it is Hamas that uses these children as pawns, as shields. It is Hamas that hides their weapons and uses their rocket launchers in hospitals and schools and mosques and civilian infrastructure areas, which is each one of those actions is a gross war crime. When Israel targets Hamas, it is targeting military targets. If it is Hamas that puts themselves and embeds themselves in civilian areas, it is Hamas that is committing a double war crime of using their own civilians and people and children as shields while indiscriminately firing over 5,000 rockets at Israel and massacring our children.
What about the calls for a humanitarian corridor to get thousands of people out of Gaza? The women, the young children, the babies. Would you support calls for that?
Well, right now there is a corridor with Egypt.
They can't get out.
So
they're stuck. Israel has bombed the border. They can't get into Egypt.
Right now, what we are facing here is the single greatest massacre of Israelis, of Jews, quite frankly and honestly, since the Holocaust. Over 1,000 people, over 1,200 now, were massacred. There are over 100 Israelis and foreign citizens, including British, that are being held captive, being held hostage by the Hamas. Perhaps you ought to ask the Hamas, will they immediately and unequivocally release every single one of the hostages, including the women and children that they are holding in Gaza?
The problem is that in 2008, 2014, when there were the incursions going into Gaza, it failed to remove Hamas. What will be different this time? Clearly, as you say, they will use the bunkers, they will use the various facilities to hide and perhaps re-emerge later. This has failed previously.
Look, what we have seen on this occasion is a game changer. We've never seen anything on this kind of level of monstrosity, of this kind of evil, of this kind of gravity. I believe the rules of the game have changed, and Israel will do whatever necessary now, not only to secure our borders, to eliminate and neutralize all those Hamas terrorists that infiltrated, and do whatever necessary not only to retrieve and return all the Israeli citizens and those that were being taken captive and kidnapped by Hamas, but ensure that we do not repeat this, because we do not want to be having this every couple of years. That is unacceptable. No sovereign nation can live with this kind of threat on its borders. And Israel, I repeat, like the UK, will do whatever necessary to defend our citizens, our borders, and our nation.
Can I ask you what should, once this has been resolved in whatever way it is, should there be war crimes investigations? And if Israel obviously has to answer for whatever has happened in Gaza, would you be comfortable with that?
As I said, I know that the difference between the two sides here is, whereas Hamas is committing a double war crime, I repeat again, it is a double war crime of not only using their own people as shields and pawns whilst indiscriminately firing rockets and massacring Israeli civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, whereas the Israeli Defense Forces targets purely and solely Hamas targets. It is Hamas that puts their own citizens in harm's way. And if there is any war crime, again, I repeat, it is on the Hamas terror group.